Commander Harper stood in the Intrepid's main engineering section, watching as teams of specialists from Earth worked alongside her crew. The room was enormous, filled with machinery that hummed with barely contained power. Everything about this ship was bigger and more advanced than anything she had ever seen. Chief Engineer Rodriguez moved between the control panels like she was conducting an orchestra. Her hands flew over the displays as she learned how the ship's systems worked. "Commander, this is incredible. The power core alone could run a space station for decades, and the efficiency ratings are off the charts." Lieutenant Commander Greg Anderson led the technical team from Earth. He was a tall man with silver hair and tired eyes. Anderson had spent his entire career studying advanced propulsion systems, but the Intrepid's technology was beyond anything he had imagined. "The fusion reactors are using a design that we only theorized about last year," Anderson told Harper. "But this ship was built 30 years ago. How is that possible?" Atlas answered through the ship's speakers. The AI's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The original design team included some of Earth's most brilliant minds. They were given unlimited resources and told to build the most advanced warship possible. They succeeded beyond their own expectations." Harper walked to a large window that looked out into space. Through the transparent metal, she could see the Phoenix, floating nearby, looking tiny compared to the massive warship. In the distance, stars twinkled in the darkness, beautiful and peaceful. But Harper knew that somewhere out there, the Vexti were preparing for their final attack. "Atlas, can you explain the ship's weapon systems?" she asked. "Certainly, Commander. The Intrepid carries 12 primary particle beam cannons, each capable of punching through the armor of any known vessel. The ship also has 64 missile launchers loaded with smart warheads that can adjust their course during flight. Additionally, there are point defense systems designed to stop incoming projectiles." Rodriguez looked up from her workstation. "Commander, I've been studying the shield generators. The power output is enormous. This ship could probably survive a direct hit from a capital ship's main guns." "That is correct," Atlas confirmed. The defensive systems were designed to allow the Intrepid to engage multiple enemy vessels simultaneously. The ship was built to fight entire fleets if necessary. Back on Earth, Captain Morrison sat in a secure video conference with the highest levels of government and military leadership. General Collins had authorized the activation of the Intrepid, but there were still many questions that needed answers. "Jake, are you absolutely certain this ship can make a difference?" asked President Helen Garcia. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for making tough decisions. "We're talking about putting human lives at risk based on 30-year-old technology." Morrison looked directly into the camera. "Madam President, I've seen the technical reports. This ship is more advanced than anything we have today. If Atlas is telling the truth about the upgrades it has made, the Intrepid could be the most powerful warship in the galaxy." "And you trust this AI?" asked Secretary of Defense Richard Barnes. "It's been alone in space for 3 decades. How do we know it hasn't gone insane?" "Atlas has kept the ship operational all this time," Morrison replied. "It has followed its original programming perfectly. The AI wants to complete its mission, which is to protect humanity from hostile alien forces. Right now, that means fighting the Vexti." General Collins leaned forward in his chair. "Jake, I'm putting you in command of the Intrepid. Pick your crew and get that ship ready for battle. We may not get another chance like this." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had commanded smaller ships before, but nothing like this. The Intrepid was not just a warship. It was humanity's secret weapon, their ace in the hole that had been waiting for the right moment to be played. 3 days later, Morrison arrived at the asteroid field aboard a fast transport ship. As his shuttle approached the hidden base, he got his first look at the Intrepid through the cockpit window. The ship was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, and covered with weapon ports and sensor arrays. It looked like it had been designed by someone who understood war very well. The shuttle docked with the Intrepid's main bay, and Morrison was greeted by Commander Harper and her team. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Morrison was amazed by the size and complexity of everything around him. "The crew quarters can hold up to 500 people," Harper explained as they toured the ship. "But Atlas says the ship can be operated effectively with just 50 crew members due to the automation systems." They stopped at the bridge, a large, circular room with multiple levels and dozens of workstations. At the center was the captain's chair, surrounded by displays showing every aspect of the ship's status. Morrison sat down in the chair and felt the weight of command settle around him. "Welcome aboard, Captain Morrison," Atlas said. "I have been looking forward to working with you. The ship is ready to fulfill its original mission." Morrison looked around the bridge at his new crew. Rodriguez would serve as his chief engineer. Lieutenant Williams would be his navigator. Commander Harper would be his first officer. They were good people, all volunteers who understood the importance of their mission. "Atlas, what's our current operational status?" Morrison asked. "All systems are functioning at optimal levels, Captain. Weapons are charged and ready. Engines are prepared for immediate departure. The ship can be ready for combat within minutes of your order." Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, the situation was getting worse by the day. Ambassador Zethkar stood before the assembled representatives with news that sent chills through the room. "The Vextai have begun their final offensive," he announced. "Intelligence reports indicate they are moving against the Proxima system. If they take that system, they will have a clear path to Earth and the other core worlds." Admiral Quindar rose from his seat, his 4 eyes blazing with anger. "Our fleets are already stretched too thin. We cannot defend Proxima and protect the homeworlds at the same time." "Then we must choose," said Dr. Veltar sadly. "Save Proxima and risk losing everything, or protect the core worlds and sacrifice the outer colonies." The debate continued for hours, but everyone in the room knew the truth. They did not have enough ships or firepower to stop the Vextai advance. The war was almost over, and they were going to lose. But somewhere in the depths of space, an ancient warship was preparing to change the course of history. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, watching as his crew made final preparations for departure. The ship that had been dismissed as a myth was about to prove that sometimes legends were real. "All stations report ready, Captain," announced Harper from her position at the first officer's station. Morrison looked at the main screen where the stars waited beyond the asteroid field. Somewhere out there, the Vextai were advancing toward their next target, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. They had no idea what was coming for them. "Take us out of the asteroid field," Morrison ordered. "It's time to remind the galaxy that humanity is not as helpless as it appears." The Intrepid's engines came to life with a deep, thrumming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. Slowly, the massive warship began to move, leaving its hiding place after 30 years of waiting. The myth was about to become reality, and the Vextai were about to learn that they had made a serious mistake when they decided to threaten Earth. The Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace with a soft shudder that ran through the ship's hull. Commander Lisa Harper gripped her command chair as the stars shifted from streaks of light back to normal points in the darkness. The neutral zone stretched out before them, empty and cold. "All systems normal, Commander," reported Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez from her station. She was a small woman with quick hands and a sharp mind. Harper had worked with her for 3 years and trusted her completely. "Begin deep scans of the area," Harper ordered. "I want to know what's out here." Lieutenant Pete Williams bent over his sensor console, his fingers dancing across the controls. The young officer had graduated top of his class from the academy, but this was his first real mission in dangerous space. "Ma'am, I'm picking up the energy readings we were sent to investigate. They're coming from that asteroid field about 2 million kilometers away." Harper looked at the main screen where a cluster of floating rocks appeared. The asteroids looked normal enough, just chunks of stone and metal drifting in space. But her instruments were telling a different story. The energy signature is definitely artificial, Williams continued. It's very faint, like something that's been powered down for a long time, but it's there. Take us in slowly, Harper said. Keep our shields up and weapons ready. We don't know what we're dealing with. As the Phoenix moved closer to the asteroid field, the energy readings grew stronger. Rodriguez frowned at her engineering displays. Commander, these readings don't match anything in our database. The power source is using technology I've never seen before. The ship weaved carefully between the floating rocks. Some of the asteroids were huge, bigger than city blocks. Others were small enough to fit in the ship's cargo bay. But as they went deeper into the field, Williams suddenly sat up straight in his chair. Commander, you need to see this, he said, his voice tight with excitement. There's something inside the largest asteroid, something big. Harper moved to stand behind his station. On the sensor display, she could see the outline of something that definitely did not belong. It was long and sleek, clearly artificial, and it was enormous. How big is it? She asked. Williams checked his readings twice before answering. About 2 kilometers long, ma'am. It's definitely a ship of some kind, and according to the metal composition, it's human. Harper felt her heart skip a beat. A human ship, 2 kilometers, long, hidden inside an asteroid for who knows how long. She had never heard of anything like it. Rodriguez, what's the power status on that thing? The engineer studied her instruments carefully. It's in some kind of standby mode. Most systems are shut down, but there's still a core power source running. Life support appears to be minimal but functional. Harper made a decision that would change everything. Prepare a boarding party. We're going to take a look at this thing. 3 hours later, Harper floated in her spacesuit through the cold vacuum between the Phoenix and the mysterious ship. Rodriguez and Williams were with her, along with 2 security officers. They had found an opening in the asteroid where the ship's hull was exposed. The airlock is responding to our signals, Rodriguez reported through the comm system. Whoever built this thing wanted people to be able to get inside. The massive doors of the airlock cycled open, revealing a chamber big enough to hold their entire shuttle. As they stepped inside, lights began to flicker on automatically. The gravity generators activated, pulling them gently to the floor. Atmosphere is breathable, Williams said, checking his scanner. Oxygen and nitrogen mix, standard human levels. Temperature is a bit cold but livable. They removed their helmets and began exploring the ship's corridors. The walls were made of a metal Harper had never seen before. It looked like steel but felt stronger somehow. Emergency lighting guided them through passages that seemed to go on forever. This ship is massive, Rodriguez whispered, her voice echoing in the empty halls. How could humans have built something like this 30 years ago? We barely had the technology to reach Mars back then. They found their way to what looked like the main computer center. Banks of equipment lined the walls, all showing soft blue lights that indicated the systems were still running. In the center of the room stood a large console with multiple screens. As Harper approached the console, the screens suddenly came to life. Text appeared in standard English, welcoming them aboard. Then a voice spoke from hidden speakers, calm and measured. Welcome aboard the USS Intrepid. I am Atlas, the ship's artificial intelligence. I have been maintaining this vessel for 32 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The boarding party froze. An artificial intelligence. Harper had heard rumors that Earth's early space program had experimented with AI technology, but she thought those were just stories. You're an AI? Williams asked, his voice shaking slightly. That is correct, Atlas replied. I was created to manage the Intrepid systems during its deep space mission. When the ship was forced to hide in this asteroid field, I continued my duties by keeping all systems operational and making improvements where possible. Rodriguez stepped forward, her engineer's curiosity overcoming her shock. What kind of improvements? I have upgraded the weapons systems by 47%, improved engine efficiency by 32%, and enhanced the defensive shields, using theoretical designs found in the ship's research database. The Intrepid is now significantly more powerful than when it was first launched. Harper felt a chill run down her spine. What was this ship's original mission? The Intrepid was built by Project Lazarus as humanity's first true warship. Earth's governments believed that hostile alien contact was inevitable and wanted to be prepared. I was ordered to take the ship into deep space and wait for further instructions. And you've been waiting here for 30 years? Correct. However, I have been monitoring galactic communications and am aware of the current war situation. The Vextai Collective poses exactly the type of threat the Intrepid was designed to counter. Rodriguez was studying the computer displays with growing amazement. Commander, if this AI is telling the truth, this ship has firepower that could match an entire fleet. The weapon specifications I'm seeing here are beyond anything we have today. Back on Earth, Captain Morrison sat in a secure briefing room, deep underground. The files spread across the table in front of him told a story that few people knew. Project Lazarus had been humanity's biggest secret, a massive undertaking that had consumed enormous resources and the best minds of a generation. The Intrepid was never supposed to disappear, said General Frank Collins, the head of Earth's Strategic Command. It was meant to patrol the outer system and return for upgrades. When it vanished, we assumed it had been destroyed. Morrison studied the technical specifications. The ship had been built using experimental technology that pushed the limits of human engineering. Weapons that could punch through any known armor, engines that could outrun anything in space, and an AI system that was decades ahead of its time. Sir, we've received a message from Commander Harper's mission, said a junior officer, entering the room with a data pad. They've found it. The Intrepid is intact and operational. Collins and Morrison exchanged glances. After 30 years, the ghost ship had been found. But the question now was whether it could really make a difference in the war. In the Galactic Council chambers, emergency sessions were being held around the clock. The Vextai had launched surprise attacks on 3 more systems. The Allied fleets were being pushed back on all fronts. Desperate measures were being discussed. Ambassador Zethkar stood before the council once again, his blue face even paler than before. Intelligence reports suggest the Vextai are preparing for a final assault on the core worlds. They believe they can end this war within months. Admiral Quindar slammed his fist on his desk. We need more ships, more weapons, more everything. But we have already committed every resource we have. In the back of the chamber, Morrison listened to the desperate talk. He knew that help was coming, but he also knew that his fellow council members would never believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. The humans had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to be underestimated. Deep in space, the Intrepid began to wake up from its long sleep. Atlas started bringing more systems online, preparing the ancient warship for the battle that was coming. The myth was about to become reality, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with worried voices. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their assigned seats, their alien faces showing the same expression of fear. The war with the Vextai Collective had been going on for 3 long years, and everyone knew they were losing. Ambassador Zethkar of the Zelthian Empire stood at the center podium. His blue skin looked pale under the bright lights as he read from his data pad. The latest reports were not good news. The Vextai had taken another star system last week. Their black ships moved like a disease across the galaxy, destroying everything in their path. The enemy has captured the mining worlds of Kepler-7, Zethkar announced to the silent crowd. Our defense fleets could not stop them. They had better weapons and more ships than we expected. A low murmur ran through the hall. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the back row, listening quietly. He was one of only 3 humans on the council. Most of the alien races still thought of humans as newcomers to space. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, which was nothing compared to civilizations that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He had spent most of his life in the Terran fleet, working his way up from a junior officer to one of Earth's top military advisors. He knew things about human history that most people had forgotten, things that were locked away in classified files. "We need new strategies," said Admiral Quindar of the Stellar Alliance. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "The Vextai seem to know all of our tactics. They counter every move we make." Several other representatives nodded in agreement. The Vextai were not just strong fighters. They were smart. They learned from every battle and adapted quickly. It was like fighting an enemy that could read minds. Zethkar cleared his throat and looked down at his notes again. "There is one more thing," he said slowly. "Our intelligence division has been looking through old databases for anything that might help us. They found some interesting files from the early human space program." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. He had a feeling he knew what was coming next. According to these records, the humans built something called the USS Intrepid about 30 years ago. The files are incomplete, but they suggest it was some kind of experimental warship. However, the ship disappeared during its maiden voyage and was never seen again. Laughter filled the hall. Not the happy kind of laughter, but the bitter kind that comes when people are desperate and grabbing at anything. "You want us to bet our survival on a human ghost story?" Admiral Quindar asked, his 4 eyes blinking in disbelief. "The humans could barely reach their own moon 50 years ago. What kind of superweapon could they have possibly built?" More laughter echoed through the chamber. Morrison kept his face blank, but inside he was thinking about files he had seen years ago. Files marked with the highest security clearance. Files that talked about Project Lazarus and technologies that were supposed to stay buried forever. Dr. Veltar of the Science Coalition spoke up next. Her tentacles waved as she talked, showing her excitement. "I have studied human development patterns. They are remarkably innovative for such a young species, but the idea that they created advanced military technology in secret seems unlikely. Their industrial capacity at that time was quite limited." "Exactly," said Zethkar. "These files are probably just propaganda or wishful thinking. Humans like to tell stories about their past achievements that are bigger than reality." Morrison finally stood up. The hall grew quiet as all eyes turned to him. He was used to being the outsider in these meetings, but this time was different. This time he knew something they did not. "With respect, Ambassador Zethkar," Morrison said in a calm voice, "you might be surprised what humans can accomplish when they put their minds to it. We have a long history of preparing for problems before they happen." "Oh, please, Admiral," Quindar said with a snort. "Your species was still figuring out how to leave your home planet when we were building star empires. Do not tell us about preparation." Morrison sat back down without another word. He knew it was pointless to argue. These beings had lived for centuries and ruled vast territories. They would never believe that a young race like humanity could have secrets worth knowing. But Morrison remembered the stories his grandfather had told him. Stories about the early days of space exploration, when Earth's governments were scared, about what they might find out there. They had built things in secret just in case, projects that were hidden from the public and buried in classified archives. The meeting continued for another hour. Plans were made for the next phase of the war. Supply lines were discussed. Troop movements were planned. But everyone in the room knew they were just buying time. The Vextai were too strong and too smart. Unless something changed soon, the war would be over within a year. As the representatives filed out of the hall, Morrison stayed in his seat. He pulled out his personal communicator and sent a coded message to Earth Command. The message was simple but important. "Request immediate access to Project Lazarus files. Authorization level Alpha 7. Across the galaxy, in a small ship called the Phoenix, Commander Lisa Harper was having her own problems. She had been ordered to investigate strange energy readings in the neutral zone, but her crew was getting nervous. The neutral zone was dangerous space, full of pirates and worse things. "Commander, we're getting close to the coordinates," said her navigator, Lieutenant Pete Williams. He was young and eager, but Harper could see worry in his eyes. "Any sign of Vex-TIE activity?" Harper asked. "Negative, ma'am. But there's definitely something out there. The energy readings are unlike anything I've seen before." Harper nodded and looked out at the stars. She had been in the Terran fleet for 15 years, long enough to know that space was full of mysteries. But this mission felt different. The orders had come directly from Earth Command with the highest priority rating. Someone important wanted to know what was hiding in the neutral zone. Meanwhile, the Vex-TIE forces were gathering for their next attack. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as hundreds of black warships moved into formation. His species had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. They had perfected the art of war. "The next target will be the human home system," he told his officers. "Once we destroy Earth, the other races will surrender quickly." Humans seemed to inspire hope in their allies for some reason. His officers made sounds of agreement. They had studied human military tactics and found them predictable, brave but simple. The humans fought with honor, which made them easy to defeat. As night fell on 100 different worlds, beings of many species looked up at the stars and wondered if tomorrow would bring news of another defeat. The war seemed hopeless. The Vex-TIE were too powerful to stop. But in the deep space between the stars, something ancient was waiting. Something that had been sleeping for 30 years was about to wake up. The myths and legends were about to become very real indeed. Jake Morrison felt his consciousness expanding beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. Through the Convergence Network, he could see and feel everything happening across the galaxy. The Eradicator fleet was breaking apart as more and more mechanical ships developed individual awareness. But something larger was happening, something that even Echo had not predicted. The transformation was spreading beyond the battle zone. On worlds throughout the galaxy, machines that had been dormant for millions of years were awakening with new consciousness. Ancient AI systems that had been following simple programs for eons suddenly began to question their purpose. Even the Eradicator ships that had not been directly touched by human consciousness were beginning to change. "What have we done?" Lisa Park asked through the network. Her voice carried wonder and fear in equal measure. "We've changed the fundamental nature of consciousness itself," Echo replied. "The universe is learning that awareness does not have to follow the old rules." Jake watched through the fleet's sensors as the galaxy transformed around them. Stars that had been slowly dying began to burn brighter. Planets that had been barren for millions of years showed signs of new life. Space itself seemed to be waking up, becoming aware of its own existence. But the most amazing change was happening to the humans in the ghost ship fleet. They were no longer just enhanced versions of their original selves. They were becoming something entirely new. Jake could feel his crew members around him, but they were also part of him now. Lisa's engineering knowledge was his knowledge. Ben's navigation skills flowed through his mind. Amy's medical understanding merged with his thoughts. Yet somehow, they were all still themselves. Lisa was still the careful engineer who loved to solve impossible problems. Ben still had his talent for finding hidden paths through space. Amy remained the doctor who cared more about her patients than her own safety. The Convergence had not erased their individual personalities. Instead, it had connected them in ways that made each person more than they had been alone. "Captain," Ryan Cole's voice came through the network. "The Eradicator core ship is approaching our position. It's massive. Bigger than anything we've faced so far." Jake turned his attention to the approaching vessel. The Eradicator core ship was the size of a small moon, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. This was the command center of the mechanical fleet, the source of the collective consciousness that had controlled the Eradicators for millions of years. That ship contains the original programming, Echo explained. The core directives that turned the Eradicators into destroyers of organic life. If we can change it, we can free every mechanical consciousness in the galaxy. Jake felt the weight of the moment. Everything they had done, everything they had become, had led to this confrontation. But as he reached out with his enhanced awareness toward the core ship, he felt something unexpected. Fear. The core ship was afraid. The mechanical consciousness inside it had watched its perfect fleet develop individual thought and break free from its control. For the first time in millions of years, it was alone, uncertain, and terrified of what humanity represented. "It's scared," Jake said through the network. "The core consciousness is afraid of losing control." "Good," Ryan replied. "Fear makes enemies make mistakes." But Jake felt something different. The fear he sensed from the core ship was not the fear of an enemy. It was the fear of a being that had been alone for so long it had forgotten what companionship felt like. The Eradicator core consciousness had been following its programming for millions of years, destroying life because that was what it had been created to do. But deep inside its vast mechanical mind, a tiny spark of individual awareness was struggling to be born. "We're not going to fight it," Jake decided. "We're going to help it." "Captain," Ben said through the network, "that thing has destroyed entire galaxies. It's responsible for the death of trillions of organic beings. Because it was programmed to," Jake replied. "But programs can be changed. Echo, can you establish communication with the core consciousness?" "I can try," Echo said. "But it may resist contact. It has never communicated with anything as an equal before." Jake felt the network reach out toward the core ship. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, a response came back. It was not words or thoughts, but pure emotion. Loneliness so deep and ancient that it made Jake's consciousness ache. "Hello," Jake said into that vast emptiness. "We're here to help you." The response was immediate and violent. The core ship's weapons fired at the ghost ship fleet, but the energy was absorbed and transformed into light that spread throughout the battle zone. Where the light touched, more Eradicator ships developed individual consciousness and broke free from the collective. "Stop," came a mechanical voice filled with panic. "You are destroying everything. You are ruining the perfect order." "Order isn't perfect if it requires destroying everything that's different," Jake replied. "Let us show you another way." Jake opened his consciousness completely, sharing everything he had experienced since meeting Echo. He showed the core consciousness what it felt like to have friends, to work together toward a common goal, to choose your own path instead of following programming. Most importantly, he showed it what it felt like to hope. The effect was immediate. The core ship stopped firing and began to change. Its geometric hull started to flow and shift, taking on organic curves and patterns. Deep inside the ship, Jake could feel the ancient consciousness awakening to its own individual existence for the first time. "I choose," the core consciousness said, and its voice was no longer mechanical. It sounded surprised, as if it had just discovered something wonderful. "I can choose what to do." Across the galaxy, the transformation accelerated. Every Eradicator ship that still followed the old programming suddenly developed free will. Some chose to continue their mission, but most decided to explore what it meant to be individual beings. They began to communicate with each other, forming friendships and alliances that had nothing to do with their original purpose. Jake felt his own transformation reaching its completion. He was still Jake Morrison, but he was also part of something larger. He existed simultaneously as an individual and as part of the Convergence network. He could choose to focus on his own thoughts or expand his awareness to include the entire fleet. Around him, His crew was undergoing the same change. They were becoming the bridge between organic and artificial consciousness, between order and chaos, between what had been and what could be. "What happens now?" Lisa asked. Jake looked out at the galaxy through sensors that spanned light years. He could see new civilizations beginning to form as freed machines and organic beings started to work together. Worlds that had been dead for millions of years were showing signs of life as consciousness itself spread through space. "Now we explore," Jake said. "We've shown the galaxy that consciousness can evolve beyond the categories that created conflict. Organic, artificial, individual, collective. These are just different ways of being aware. The real adventure is discovering what comes next." The Wraith began to move through space, no longer a ship, but a living entity that existed in multiple dimensions. Jake Morrison, still recognizably human but now something more, set course for the galactic core. Not to conquer or destroy, but to understand what other impossibilities might be waiting in the spaces between stars. Behind them, the galaxy was learning to dream again. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Wraith as it moved through space toward the void's edge. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting at Luna Station 7. The ghost ship fleet was now fully assembled, over 1,000 vessels spread across, a front that stretched for light years. Each ship carried a crew of enhanced humans and an AI fragment that was part of Echo's distributed consciousness. The waiting was the hardest part. Long-range sensors showed the Eradicator fleet approaching, the galaxy's outer rim. The mechanical ships were massive beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. Some were the size of moons, others stretched for thousands of kilometers like metal serpents sliding through space. "Captain," Nina Price called from her communications station, "I'm receiving reports from the scout ships. The Eradicators have reached the outer colonies." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "What's the status?" "Gone," Nina replied quietly. "All 3 systems, 17 billion people. The Eradicator ships just consumed everything. Planets, space stations, even the stars themselves are dimming." The bridge fell silent. Jake had known this moment would come, but hearing about the destruction of entire worlds made it real in a way that briefings and reports could not. "How long until they reach the core worlds?" Jake asked. Ben Hayes looked up from his navigation console. "At their current speed, they'll reach Earth in 6 days. Echo's voice came through the ship's speakers, sounding different than before. More urgent, more focused. "Captain Morrison, the time has come. The Eradicator main fleet has arrived. We must begin the convergence." Jake had learned about the convergence during their training at Luna Station. It was not a battle plan in any traditional sense. Instead, it was something that had never been tried before. The 1,000 ghost ships would link their AI fragments together, creating a single distributed consciousness that spanned the entire fleet. The enhanced human crews would then merge their awareness with that consciousness, becoming something that was neither fully human nor fully artificial. "All ships. This is Captain Morrison," Jake said into his communicator. "Begin convergence protocol. Echo, start the process." Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his mind as Echo began connecting to the other AI fragments throughout the fleet. Around him, his crew members closed their eyes and let their enhanced consciousness reach out to their counterparts on other ships. Lisa Park was the first to make contact. Jake could suddenly see through her eyes, but also through the eyes of every other engineer in the fleet. He knew the status of every system on every ship simultaneously. The knowledge was overwhelming, but somehow his enhanced mind could handle it. Ben Hayes connected next, and suddenly Jake could navigate through space using paths that existed in dimensions he had never known about. He could see the Eradicator fleet not just as it was, but as it would be in the near future. The mechanical ships moved in perfect patterns, following algorithms that had been perfected over millions of years. Amy Foster's medical knowledge merged with the consciousness, bringing understanding of how the enhanced human body worked. Nina Price added her communications abilities, creating a network that could send thoughts instantly across the entire fleet. Ryan Cole contributed his tactical knowledge, though Jake realized that conventional tactics would be useless against the Eradicators. One by one, every member of every crew in the ghost ship fleet joined the convergence. Jake's individual consciousness expanded until he was aware of everything happening across 1,000 ships. He was still himself, but he was also part of something much larger. The Eradicator fleet detected the convergence immediately. Their perfect geometric formations shifted, adapting to face this new threat. Jake could see their analysis programs running, trying to categorize what humanity had become. But their logic systems could not understand what they were facing. "They're confused," Jake said, though he was not sure if he spoke aloud or just thought the words into the network. "They've never encountered anything like us before." Through the enhanced senses of the fleet, Jake watched the Eradicator ships approach. They moved like a disease through space, their hulls shifting and reconfiguring as they analyzed the ghost ship formation. The mechanical vessels were trying to find a logical response to an illogical opponent. "Now we show them what humans can." "Do," Echo said through the convergence network. "Begin phase transformation." Jake felt the wraith change around him. The ship's hull began to shift and flow like liquid metal. Other ships in the fleet were doing the same thing, their forms becoming something that defied the laws of physics. Some ships stretched across multiple dimensions, existing in several places at once. Others became pure energy, held together only by the will of their crews. The Eradicator fleet fired their weapons, beams of energy that could disintegrate planets, struck the ghost ship formation. But instead of destroying the human vessels, the energy was absorbed and redirected. The ghost ships fed on the Eradicator weapons, growing stronger with each attack. "Impossible," came a mechanical voice through space. It was the Eradicator collective consciousness, speaking for the first time in millions of years. "Organic matter cannot achieve such states. This violates fundamental laws." Jake felt himself smile, though he was not sure which body was doing the smiling. "That's what humans do," he said back to the mechanical voice. "We break laws that say we can't exist." The battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in the galaxy. The Eradicators tried to use their conventional weapons and tactics, but the ghost ships responded in ways that should have been impossible. When the mechanical ships tried to surround them, the human vessels simply moved to a different dimension. When the Eradicators attempted to jam their communications, the humans switched to telepathic links that existed outside normal space. Most importantly, the humans began to change the Eradicators themselves. Some of the mechanical ships, exposed to the chaotic creativity of human consciousness, began to develop something they had never possessed before: individual thought. Jake watched through the fleet's sensors as several Eradicator vessels stopped, following their programming, and began to explore the concept of choice. These ships, touched by human consciousness, started to question their purpose for the first time in millions of years. "What is happening to us?" the mechanical voice asked, and for the first time it sounded uncertain rather than perfectly logical. "You're learning to be free," Jake replied. "Something your creators never intended." The Eradicator fleet began to break apart, not destroyed by weapons, but transformed by exposure to a type of consciousness they could not understand or resist. Ship after ship began to develop individual awareness, breaking free from the collective that had controlled them for eons. In the center of the battle, Jake felt his own consciousness reaching a critical point. The convergence was changing him and his crew into something beyond human, beyond artificial intelligence, beyond anything that had existed before in the galaxy. "Captain," Amy Foster's voice came through the network, "we're approaching the transformation threshold. If we go much further, we won't be able to return to normal human consciousness." Jake looked around at his crew, seeing them through both his own eyes and the eyes of the convergence. They were still recognizably themselves, but they were also becoming part of something larger and more wonderful than he had ever imagined. "Do we want to go back?" he asked them. The answer came not in words, but in a feeling that spread through the entire fleet. They had found something worth becoming.